So there's always this kind of this rub and this separation between queer identity and religious identity that doesn't need to exist. Throughout our history as humans, there have been aspects of physical intimacy that have expressed our divine nature. It's a beautiful thing to see a poet reclaiming that sense of a spiritual connection, because particularly in poems, there are references to nature, to the senses, to spirituality, to higher, to the divine.
Tonight in Oakland by Danez Smith. I did not come here to sing a blues. Lately I open my mouth and out comes marigolds, yellow plums. I came to make the sky a garden. Give me rain or give me honey, dear Lord. The sky has given us no water this year. I ride my bike to a boy. When I get there, what we make will not be beautiful or love at all, but it will be deserved. I've started seeking men to wet the harvest. Come, tonight I declare we must move instead of pray. Tonight, east of here, 2 boys, one dressed in what could be blood, and one dressed in what could be blood before the wound, meat and mean mug. And God, tonight, let them dance. Tonight, the bullet does not exist. Tonight, the police have turned to their God for forgiveness. Tonight, we bury nothing. We serve a God with no need for shovels. We serve a God with a bad hip and a brother in prison. And tonight, let every man be his own Lord. Let wherever 2 people stand be a reunion of ancient lights. Let's waste the moon's marble glow, shouting our names to the stars until we are the stars. Oh, precious God. Oh, sweet black town. I am drunk and I thirst. When I get to the boy who lets me practice hunger with him, I will not give him the name of your newest ghost. I will give him my body, and what he does with it is none of my business. But I will say, look, I made it a whole day. Still, no rain. Still, I am without exit wound. And he will say, tonight, I want to take you how the police do, unarmed and sudden. And tonight, when we dream of dancing in a city slowly becoming ash.
Now we'll get started on the line-by-line analysis. I did not come here to sing a blues. Lately, I open my mouth and out come marigolds, yellow plums. I came to make the sky a garden. So right there, I did not come here to sing a blues. Gives me the impression that this poem is not about sadness. It's a hint that it's about joy and celebration. Lately, I open my mouth and out comes marigolds, yellow plums. I came to make the sky a garden. Oh, right there, I start thinking, marigolds, yellow plums. I'm thinking about all of the biblical references to nature, to gardens, to refreshing springs. And I immediately started thinking, okay, there's something about this that reminds me of part of the Bible. And so I went and I found my study Bible. In Song of Solomon. This book in the Bible is supposedly written by Solomon. It's either written by Solomon to one of the women in his harem, I guess would be the correct word for it, because he was the king and that was a thing back then, is to have like a harem of lots of women. Or it's written by Solomon to show the love between a shepherd and a shepherdess. So a boy who takes care of sheep and the shepherdess that lives in the area. And they're writing about their love for each other. Song of Solomon is essentially a love poem. The love poem is written in verse. It's written in a poetic way where a line continues on to the next line, and they're more or less couplets. So I thought, this poem seems like it's a couplet as well. And in Song of Solomon, there's one part that I started thinking, like, oh, this seems similar to what Danez is writing about in this poem. So it's in chapter 2, verse 12. The flowers appear on the earth. The time of singing has come, and the voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land. The fig tree ripens its figs, and the vines are in blossoms. They give forth fragrance. Arise, my love, my beautiful one, and come. O my dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the crannies of the cliff. Right? So he's just, this shepherd, or perhaps Solomon, is calling out to this shepherdess or the woman in his harem, and like, hey, like, I'm into you, and making all of these references to nature and to fruit, which fruit represents fertility, love, physical intimacy. And that's the same thing that Danez is doing in this poem, is making these references to nature, to the sky, to marigolds, to plums. The next line, give me rain or give me honey, dear Lord. Now, this line reminds me of like much more of Song of Solomon, because there's that reference throughout the Bible to rain and water being a blessing. And, you know, the people of ancient days, they would pray for rain because without rain, they couldn't grow their food. So that idea of plenty, right? There being so much out there. Song of Solomon is set in this fruitful landscape, which is kind of what Smith is describing here. There is a break in the otherwise violent world to make room for people to meet their God and to celebrate. They're celebrating this detente, or this pause in the violence, through acts of physical intimacy. And if you look at Song of Solomon, chapter 4, verse 11, you'll see also there are these references to physical intimacy. The line reads, your lips drip nectar, my bride. Honey and milk are under your tongue. The fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. The garden locked is my sister, my bride. A spring locked, a fountain sealed. So there are references there to gardens and to water and just smelling good, flowers. And you have that in the Danez Smith poem as well.
What are your thoughts about the poem? I'd love to read your comments and respond to them, because that's the most important part.
The sky has given us no water this year. Now that reference to the sky has given us no water could be a reference to police violence as well, and to the lack of blessing that has come through police violence. Now, this poem was written around the time of Michael Brown's death. It was written after Michael Brown's death, when there were protests across the nation, and particularly in Oakland. Danez, I believe, was living in Oakland at the time, and their protest about police violence, the way that police are treating us, members of the Black community. And this idea that the sky has given us no water could be this idea of a lack of a blessing from God in reference to police brutality, just police being unfairly cruel to the Black community. I ride my bike to a boy. When I get there, what we make will not be beautiful or love at all, but it will be deserved. When I read that, like, it will not be beautiful or love at all, but it will be deserved. So that gives me the idea that it's an actual physical need. It's a need for closeness, for physical intimacy, that it's not, it's not something that is a want. It is a need. And it won't be beautiful. It won't be love at all, but it will be deserved. That means it means it's something that's earned. So Danez means I've earned this. I've started seeking men to wet the harvest. The speaker is saying that love between men is what waters his metaphorical garden. So now we're getting into like sensual part of the poem. It could also be a reference to that second line of the poem, which reads, lately I opened my mouth and out come marigolds, right? Yellow plums. So even though it's not raining in the city of Oakland, Danez has been watering his metaphorical garden, and there are marigolds and plums coming out of his metaphorical garden. Come, tonight I declare we must move instead of pray. So this is the first tercet. That's the first 3-line stanza, whereas everything else to this point, they've been couplets, 2-line stanzas. And maybe this is the first tercet, 3-line stanza, because this is the first direct reference to the love these men are seeking, being part of the connection to God and spirituality. Danez is a student of sonnets, and in particular voltas. So a volta is this dramatic transformation of a speaker's message. And since this is the first appearance of the word tonight, which is a call, as Danez put it, it's that singular voice calling, akin to the preacher's call and response. So perhaps this is why there are 3 lines here, is because it's that call. The audience of the poem is God. There's a reference to the 2 boys that are being physically intimate, and to that watering the garden and that spirituality. Tonight, east of here, 2 boys, one dressed in what could be blood and one dressed in what could be blood before the wound. Meat and mean mug. So that line, tonight, east of here, maybe it's in East Oakland. So there are different parts of the city, and that's one neighborhood. East Oakland seems to me like it's the biggest neighborhood in Oakland, because it's literally everything past the Lakeshore District all the way down to San Leandro. So Oakland is kind of a long city, and even though East Oakland is technically south, I don't understand how it got that name, but technically East Oakland is south, and it's the majority of the south of Oakland. It's still called East Oakland. It's also because it's in the flats of Oakland. It is a poor neighborhood in Oakland, and it has been traditionally a black part of Oakland. Most of Oakland was black traditionally, but that East Oakland has remained a black area in Oakland. So when he writes, tonight, east of here, 2 boys, one dressed in what could be blood and one dressed in what could be blood before the wound. Okay, so we already know that Danez is going to get their metaphorical harvest watered by men, right? And by this boy. And one dressed in what could be blood. Now, there are a couple different references to what this could be, okay? So one dressed in what could be blood, it could be a reference to the boys feeling more confident in their sexuality. And I'm going to throw out a bunch of different ideas of what this could mean, okay? So it could be that. It could be the fact that they are black men in Oakland, a city with a high rate of violence towards black men, right? Gang violence or just police violence, just violence in general. I didn't find much evidence in the poem for that necessarily in terms of gang violence, but the police violence definitely, since this poem was motivated by the unrest in Ferguson and Black Lives Matter, which was a result of those Ferguson protests, then that reference to violence and this being like police violence on the boys might be some evidence for that. And then it might be a reference to one of the boys being openly gay and the other one being gay curious. Okay. So one dressed in what could be blood before the wound. Okay. And one dressed in what could be blood, right? So it could be just about one, like when Danez writes, I've started seeking men to wet the harvest. So that gives me an idea that maybe Danez is exploring their sexuality and that reference, that is what's happening. But in light of the other religious elements throughout the poem, I think the strongest argument could be made for this being a reference to Christ or the crucifixion with the wounded hands, or that's the symbol of the perfection of love, that blood. It might be even a symbol of Jesus understanding the wounds of mankind, because those hands are in Christian beliefs. It's the blood before the wound. It might symbolize Adam and Eve, the ignorance of that initial sin. It might be the ignorance of physical intimacy. it might be the kind of the pain that love brings, or even the harm of the separation that some Christian sects have against homosexuality. I mean the SECTS kind of sects. Now, I do not think that that is a reference to the boys being part of the gang. I did read in a different analysis of this poem that it might be a reference to the boys being violent, because in particular that line, they meet and they mean mug. But I think the meeting and mean mug is more like posturing, like peacocking, how birds, or not peacocking, but like how birds will go out and they flaunt their feathers to look at each other. I think that's more what's happening with the meet and mean mug, and not actual violence. Now, the blood and the blood before the wound, I think I mentioned that it could be HIV as well, because Danez Smith is HIV positive. And now, analyzing that line in light of HIV positive identity, that's not something that I can necessarily do, but I do want to be an ally in pointing out that that's what it could be. Now, in the book, the poem before this one actually has a direct reference to HIV and Danez's status as an HIV positive person. So that gives me the impression, especially when I'm reading the book and I see the flow of poems, that it could be that. But, I do think that it's more of a religious reference here to the blood of Christ, the body of Christ, and the wound. It's both the two things, religious reference and a reference to police violence. Tonight, east of here, two boys, one dressed in what could be blood and one dressed in what could be blood before the wound, meet and mean mug. And God, tonight let them dance. Tonight, the bullet does not exist. Tonight, the police have turned to their God for forgiveness. There, the bullet does not exist. It's Danez calling out to God to solve police violence and to solve gang violence, to put an end to the violence and to bring peace and joy, right? Tonight, the police have turned to their God for forgiveness. So it's no longer about the police either committing acts of violence or turning to the Black community and apologizing. It's about God taking over that burden off of the Black community's back and kind of working with the police in order to solve their problems. Now, I definitely think that that is a reference to the historical institution of the police being an anti-Black institution. The first police were slave patrols, and it was about property, about human beings being property. And then the police expanded into criminalizing poor people, and mostly Black people. But even now, people who are poor and who commit certain kinds of crimes are way more likely to end up in jail than people who commit white-collar crimes. So committing a white-collar crime usually doesn't end people in jail. You don't end up in jail, but committing either property crimes or violent crimes, particularly when you're poor, that is what most people end up in jail and in prison for. So the police are turning to their God for forgiveness for their sins against the Black community and against the community at large. Tonight we bury nothing. We serve a God with no need for shovels. Right there, tonight we bury nothing, meaning we don't have to hide anything, but also literally meaning we don't have to bury anyone who has been murdered, anyone who has fallen at the hands of police through police violence. We serve a God with no need for shovels. So a God with no need for shovels is a God that, I think right there, that God with no need for shovels refers to the spirituality in the poem, the idea that God has brought a reprieve from violence, and that God is really bringing the community together in joy. And so there's no need for shovels because it's all about joy, the beauty of the night, physical intimacy, and spirituality. We serve a God with a bad hip and a brother in prison. Tonight, let every man be his own Lord. So the line, we serve a God with a bad hip and a brother in prison. So that can reference to physical and sexual intimacy, that it's referring to that intimacy as an expression of the divine. So that physical intimacy is an expression of the divine intimacy. Now, I am doing a literary analysis and making connections to the Bible. I am not a Bible scholar. I am not in any way wanting to bring in any kind of controversial interpretation of the Bible, particularly for those who are watching this who are religious. I figure if you made it this far in, hopefully you're not offended by this. And if you are, then I'm analyzing the literature of this and the connection to the Bible. I'm not a scholar. I am an expert when it comes to literary analysis, but not when it comes to biblical analysis. But here, this is a reference to that physical intimacy as an expression of the divine. And throughout our history as humans, there have been aspects of physical intimacy that have expressed our divine nature. And that is something that has shown up repeatedly in certain denominations of Christianity. Maybe some people would say that they're not approved denominations, but they have shown up. They've shown up in pre-Christian religions, physical intimacy as an expression of the divine. Also, maybe it's a reference to the poet, since the next line is about every man being his own Lord. So this, we serve a God with a bad hip and a brother in prison. Maybe Smith has a brother in prison. Maybe this is a specific person who has a bad hip and a brother in prison. I mean, who knows, right? It could be so many things. Now, I also thought this has a brother in prison. In the United States, there are a disproportionate number of Black men who are either in prison or who have previously been incarcerated. The U.S. has a fourth of the world's prison population, even though we're only 5% of the world's population. And part of that has to do with policing policies, with for-profit prisons, with the way that our prison system is set up to not necessarily prevent and rehabilitate people, but to, as someone who was in prison told me, going to prison made him a better criminal. It didn't make him, he didn't feel contrition after going to prison. So, and once you've gone to prison in the US, you have a mark, and it's hard for you to get a job. It's hard for you to lead a life that doesn't have this stain from going to prison. And so this idea that we serve a God with a bad hip and a brother in prison could mean like we serve a God that has forgiveness, that where you've atoned for your sins actually by going to prison, and where that's not something that's a mark against you. Tonight, let every man be his own Lord. So there directly, this idea that a person can be their own God. They can be an expression of the divine. Let wherever two people stand be a reunion of ancient lights. So the lights, ancient lights, that's a reference to the soul. That's a reference to the light created by God. And this idea that we are eternal beings. And so our light as living spiritual beings is created and connected to God. Let's waste the moon's marble glow, shouting our names to the stars until we are the stars. And this right there, let's waste the moon's marble glow. It implies a certain amount of excess, right? So as if this is an extravagant use of nature's beauty, of light and the dim light provided by one source of light in the dark. And this all happening at night, that reunion of ancient lights. Let's waste the moon's marble glow. So you have the images created are of lights, of stars, the stars representing souls, that the people are ancient lights, right? We waste the moon's marble glow shouting our names to the stars until we are the stars, right? So you can transcend and become a star yourself. Oh, precious God, oh, sweet black town, I am drunk and I thirst. This, oh, precious God, oh, sweet black town. Oakland, the slang name for Oakland is the town. So Black Town, right? Chocolate City. There are lots of different slang names for Oakland. One of my students called Oakland Baby Baghdad, Shy Rock. I don't know, there are lots of different words, but oh, sweet black town is definitely a reference to Oakland. I am drunk and I thirst. Ooh, so I am drunk is Danez saying that they're intoxicated with excitement, with this feeling blossoming in fruitfulness. It's all of those feelings that are referenced in the first few lines, that drunkenness, and then I thirst, right? So Danez has been wetting the harvest with men, and Danez is feeling that desire for the boy that Danez is about to get intimate with. When I get to the boy who lets me practice hunger with him, I will not give him the name of your newest ghost. So practicing hunger, that is interesting because it's not who fills my hunger, who waters my garden. It's practicing hunger, which almost implies that like Danez's thirst is never fully quenched, or the speaker's thirst is never fully quenched. I will not give him the name of your newest ghost. Another religious reference. So Christ's first gift to the disciples on Easter was the name of the first ghost, right? The name of the Holy Spirit. So maybe here, what Danez means is that Danez is not planning on giving the boy Danez's spirit, but just Danez's body, with all human beings being a combination of body and spirit. And their spirit is for Danez themselves, not for the boy. And maybe even not for God, but just for Danez. I will give him my body, and what he does with it is none of my business. But I will say, and that's interesting too, what he does with it is none of my business. Ooh, a lot going on there, right? I'll let you, the viewer, read between the lines right there. I will say, look, I made it the whole day. Still no rain. Still, I am without exit wound. So this might be a reference to the blood from before, which again, I think because of the police references, this is literally a reference to violence. Like, I've made it through the day and I haven't been shot by the police because there's been that reprieve. God has given us this reprieve. It could also be a reference to Danez remaining HIV negative. It could be a reference to the wounds of the crucifixion of God, of, not having those wounds of the crucifixion perhaps. And he will say, tonight I want to take you how the police do, unarmed and sudden. Ooh, oh my goodness. If I could give someone a Pulitzer Prize, I would give Danez a Pulitzer Prize for that line. I want to take you how the police do, unarmed and sudden. So there's just so much there. Just the brilliance of it it's the brilliance of it, the intimacy of it, to say like, look, we're treated like animals by the police, but still we can find joy. Still we can make jokes about police violence and make jokes and make light of a topic that's so hard, that's so heavy. When Danez wrote this poem, said that this was written about a night after the unrest in Ferguson and the police violence and protests, a night that was actually calm and peaceful. So to say, I'm going to take you like the police do, unarmed and sudden, it creates such a vivid image in my mind, but it's a level of intimacy that I think if Danez was being intimate with a Black man, it's a playfulness and just a tenderness while also acknowledging and making light of such a heavy topic, which is, that line strikes me. I can't even describe why, but that line has stuck in my head, and I've repeated it to so many different people because I was like, it's just so brilliant, right? I want to take you how the police do, unarmed and sudden, right? I also, as someone who's older, I have to say that the first thing that I thought, because of that, the police, unarmed and sudden, I thought about the guy from 6 Feet Under, the police officer boyfriend of one of the main characters on the show. And that was the first thing that popped into my mind. Thank you, Danez Smith. I haven't thought about that guy for a long time, but while you were being inspired and thinking of that, I was thinking about that guy. And tonight, when we dream of dancing in a city slowly becoming ash. That right there, a city slowly becoming ash, a city that's burning because of protests, because of fire, because of violence, because of things, just the heat, just incinerating things. That's what I think about. That line is not in the poem in the book, but that line, it brings a finality, a closure to the poem that I don't think is necessary based on the book. So in the book, there are more poems that come after, so you don't need that finality. But here in the poem that's online, that finality, the sense of closure and completeness, it literally closes the poem on a note of an emotional, like just to put an emotional ribbon tying up the package to say, I'm done, the package is ready to be shared with the public. Now, something that Danez Smith hasn't necessarily mentioned, but I do think is important to mention in this video, is the role of the Black church, and that the Black church has played, and that all churches have played in the United States in the liberation of Black people. Since there's so many religious references in this poem, it would be irresponsible to not highlight that role. Now, the civil rights movement, if it weren't for white evangelicals, for white religious people, specifically church members, Martin Luther King would not have been able to make the progress and to progress Black people, all minorities, women. There wouldn't be the equal rights that we have now. And in many ways, the church is responsible for that. Now, it's a complicated thing because while the church has helped with civil rights and with equality in so many different ways, especially during the 60s, right? Now, the relationship between queer people and the church has become very, very tenuous. So there's always this kind of this rub and this separation between queer identity and religious identity that doesn't need to exist, right? So nowhere in the Bible are there direct references, as far as I know, and I'm looking in my study Bible here. The references are to people committing immoral acts. They're not to the act of homosexuality, right? Now, the people who are doing things that are, bad in God's eyes are doing things like harming other people. It's not that they're just living their life and they're being gay. So there's definitely a tension between mainstream Christianity and gay identity that is unfortunate because the whole point of the New Testament is Jesus wants us to love our brothers as we would love ourselves, right? And so our brother includes gay people, it includes queer people, it includes a whole range of people. And it's a beautiful thing to see a poet reclaiming that identity and reclaiming that sense of a spiritual connection, because particularly in poems, there are references to nature, to the senses, to spirituality, to higher, to the divine that can be made in poems that are just absolutely beautiful. And gosh, I don't think more needs to be said. Let me just end by highly encouraging you to get this book, Don't Call Us Dead, by Danez Smith. It was a finalist for the National Book Award. And the poems in the book, they represent an experience of being Black in the U.S., an American experience, an experience of being a gay man, an experience of being non-binary that is so important for everyone to be familiar with and understand.
And this is the most important part. What are your thoughts about the poem? I'd love to read about and respond to your comments. And consider liking the video if you found value in what you watched.